Welcome to Shaun and Ari Discuss Israel, the podcast where we deep dive into pressing issues in Israel and the Jewish world. Each week, we'll unpack the latest developments and controversies in Israel. Joining me in my journey is Ari Kalka. Together, we'll navigate the intricacies of life in Israel, the challenges, the controversies, and the different narratives. If you're passionate about Israel and want to learn more, stick with us.
All right, let's get into today's episode then. What are we talking about today, Shaun?
Today's episode is going to be all about Lebanon and, more importantly, Iran.
Sounds good to me. Let's get going.
Okay, so it is the first week of August. For those who don't know, there is a lot of talk about some type of imminent war between Israel and Iran, but everything seems to go back to Lebanon. So, Ari, with your permission, I'm going to give a little bit of a historical background to the country of Lebanon and its interesting relationship to Israel.
All right, you take it away.
So Lebanon, the country to the north of Israel, achieved nominal independence from the French starting in the 1920s and then a full independence after 1945. Now, interestingly, even though Lebanon is a Middle Eastern country, because of its historical roots going all the way back to the Crusades, but more specifically with the French Mandate, it had a almost perfect mix of Christian and Islamic background, and as a result, its initial constitution ensured that the country would be evenly split between Muslims and Christians, and that was the way it was supposed to be. And that's kind of the way Lebanon functioned all the way up until 1970. In fact, Beirut was regarded as the Paris of the Middle East. It was very cosmopolitan, Christian, modern Islam. It was a beautiful vacation spot. It had a Club Med, among other things. And then in the 1970s, things began to change for the worst. The delicate balance between Christians and Muslims was upset by a major influx of Palestinians who were expelled from Jordan following a failed uprising by the PLO and Yasser Arafat. And so thousands, tens of thousands of Palestinians began flooding into southern Lebanon under the auspices back then of Yasser Arafat and his Fatah organization. And they used southern Lebanon as staging points for terrorist raids and rocket attacks into northern Israel. Southern Lebanon became infamously known as Fatah land. And in all of this, with the influx of Palestinians and the changing population that was delicately balanced between Christians and Muslims, a civil war broke out in Lebanon, which meant that the Lebanese government ceased to function because of different factions within the Christian community and Shia and Sunni Muslims all joining different sides, and you had a multifaceted and complicated civil war. In this chaos, southern Lebanon's terrorist bases grew to the point that they were eventually be able to launch major terrorist raids, cross-border attacks, and rockets on Israel. And finally, in 1982, the Israeli Defense Force launched a major assault, initially called Operation Peace for the Galilee, where the Israeli Defense Force invaded southern Lebanon, and the army made its way all the way up to Beirut. The Israeli army actually embedded itself in Beirut, and eventually what would happen was the PLO under Arafat would flee Lebanon and move to Tunisia. But, importantly, with all of this going on, we also simultaneously have the Iranian Revolution, which took place in 1979, and Iran, the new Islamic power in the region, saw its duty to push out all non-Muslim foreign occupiers in the Middle East. More importantly, they saw themselves as the saviors of the small minority of Shiite Muslims that had been oppressed in Lebanon for so long. And so, using the excuse of the Israeli invasion, they set up a new political and terrorist organization called the Party of God, or in Arabic, Hezbollah. The aim was to set up a terrorist organization and a political party that could drive out the Israeli forces and set up a new power dynamic in the crumbling and hopefully the rebuilt Lebanon. All right, Ari, I'm sure you have some insights.
Okay, one little interesting fact that is a minor detail but a very important one, I think, moving forward, was that the first Lebanon War, the 1983 war in Lebanon, so the first time that Israel had a large-scale amphibious invasion of a foreign country, where we landed a brigade-sized force on the Lebanese coast, very considerably far behind what the front lines of the Israeli army was at the time, and it was one of the most successful amphibious landings in military history in the world, which is something that there's been talk that we might see again in the near future again.
Right. Interestingly, Israel officially announced that they have 2 brand new amphibious crafts. And before this, the question was, why would Israel need amphibious landing crafts? It seems to contradict Israel's doctrine.
Up until now.
Up until now. Interesting. All right. So Israel invades Lebanon in 1982, and then from 1983 until May 2000, the Israeli Defense Force maintains an 18-kilometer security zone between the Israeli border all the way into Lebanese territory. And in this security zone are a number of IDF bases, and Israel actually employs a local militia called the South Lebanese Army, which was predominantly Christian. And together, the IDF and the South Lebanese Army patrol this area between 83 and 2000. Ongoing clashes between the Israelis and Hezbollah, with Hezbollah slowly learning new tactics and all the time gaining weapons and technology from Iran. Finally, in 2000, under Prime Minister Ehud Barak, Israel decides it's time to leave Lebanon. And so almost overnight, in May 2000, the Israeli Defense Force abandons southern Lebanon. No agreement, no discussion. Within 48 hours, Israel's entire nearly 20-year deployment in southern Lebanon comes to an end, and Israel moves to the border. In fact, as somebody who was there prior to the pullout and the pullout itself, I very vividly remember that soon after the pullout, we actually escorted United Nations peacekeepers who came up to the border with cans of spray paint and officially acknowledged that Israelis had moved to the international border. And that was a very big deal for Israel at the time. And this continued until October 2000, where despite the fact that Israel had moved to the internationally designated border, on October 7th, 2000, a Hezbollah squad crossed the border, attacked an Israeli Defense Force patrol, murdered, and took the bodies of 3 Israeli soldiers, and they held them for about 3 years. And then in 2006, a major incursion took place where a larger Israeli patrol was attacked by Hezbollah. 5 soldiers were killed, and 3 Israeli Defense Force soldiers were kidnapped, or their bodies were kidnapped, into Lebanon. And this set off the Second Lebanon War, which went on for nearly a month, between Israel and Hezbollah. And this war ended in August 2006, 18 years ago exactly. The war ended with United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, which officially recognized the Israel and Lebanese border. It established a larger United Nations international force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, which was an armed presence in southern Lebanon, whose job it was to maintain the fact that there would be no armed groups other than the Lebanese army in the area of southern Lebanon, and that Hezbollah, the same party, would disarm its entire force in southern Lebanon. This was a United Nations Security Council resolution that was legally enforced. Israel agreed to this resolution, and the Lebanese army agreed to this resolution. In fact, the American government at the time, under President George Bush, agreed to prop up and pay the Lebanese army so that they would have the firepower and manpower to keep Hezbollah at bay. France and Spain led the UNIFIL force to make sure that there was a larger international presence in southern Lebanon which would keep Hezbollah at bay. There was even a maritime force along the border that included Dutch and German patrol boats. And despite all this, Hezbollah did not disarm. Hezbollah did not leave southern Lebanon. It just got bigger and better, and Iran continued to supply them.
I think that it's more important that it's not just that Iran supplied them with a constant supply of more and better technology and more advanced weaponry. At this entire time, Hezbollah is being trained by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, both by sending their commanders to Iran for training, and there were Iranian training staff or training commanders now coming to Lebanon to train the lower rank and file of the Hezbollah army at that point. It wasn't just, let's just send them weapons. It was, we're actually going to train them and give them better procedures, better doctrine, and make them a more formidable fighting force than they were to begin with.
Right. And I think it's important to realize that when everyone thinks of Hezbollah and Hamas, they think of these militia armies. As you've pointed out, Hezbollah is not. Hezbollah is pretty much a full standing army with everything from modern technology to drones to anti-aircraft equipment, and they're incredibly well trained as a large fighting force, not a militia.
Correct. So I think also one of the greatest examples of that we see now in our current fighting on the northern border, which we're getting to now, is that on every anti-tank rocket that they fire, that they then publicize afterwards, the video of them hitting a house, hitting a jeep, hitting something, whatever they're hitting, the videos you can tell have been videotaped from multiple angles, from kilometers away. And they had to coordinate that beforehand. They know that we're going to be shooting at point A. We have to videotape it from not just where we're shooting the rocket, but we can take 3 kilometers to the east from this mountain. We still have a good view, and we can videotape it from multiple angles and then publicize after we edited it out to show the same attack from multiple different directions, which shows a high level of coordination and a high level of sophistication that they're able to coordinate it and know what the other side is doing and when.
I think it's important, this idea of coordination and the fact that the Hezbollah military, and I have to call them that, were trained by the Iranians. I think it's also important to point out that many of the mid-level and higher-level commanders in Hezbollah are also battle-hardened. They joined the Iranians and the Syrian army in the Syrian civil war, where they were probably responsible not only for major military encounters, but some terrible atrocities against Syrian civilians. So this is a battle-hardened army with technology, and they're not scared to do terrible things.
Right.
Okay, let's get into the current situation. So that is the background. There's one more thing I want to speak about, and Ari, I want to hear your insight into this. A couple of years ago, gas was discovered really on the international border, the international coastal border between Israel and Lebanon. And the gas field was eventually turned over to Lebanon in a deal that was orchestrated by the current Biden administration.
I don't think there's much to say. We discovered a gas field on our side of the border in our territory. We had a government led by Yair Lapid that offered and gave to our enemy, because Hezbollah in Lebanon is our enemy. We gave our enemy a prize without demanding anything in return. We got more promises of peace and more meaningless words, but we got nothing in return. And it's another part of the Biden administration's bigger play when it comes to diplomacy, which is just losing every war but doing it really slowly. They're not ever aiming to achieve victory in anywhere on the global international field wherever they're involved in diplomacy over the last 4 years. There's no examples of them achieving victory, just achieving failure, but very, very slowly.
One of the themes we see perpetually coming up with Lebanon is there's always these international agreements and international guarantees, and then they fall apart. After 2000, Israel officially moved back to the recognized border. Hezbollah crossed the border. Israel got into trouble. In 2006, Hezbollah crossed the border. The war ended with the United Nations Security Council resolution. Hezbollah broke this resolution. Israel got into trouble. And that's where we are today. And we had this maritime agreement where we had international guarantees again, and the international community failed Israel.
Right. So it goes back to the question of, can Israel ever rely on the international community to ever protect it? I think that one thing our history has taught us is that the only people we can rely on for our own defense and security is ourselves. and that all the international security agreements and protections and offers of help, they're not really worth the paper they're written on in the end of the day. And that once we just have to accept that reality and stop going down the same road again and again, expecting a different outcome.
Let's talk about the situation as it happened. The 7th of October, we're all very much familiar with the atrocities that happened on the Gaza envelope. But tell us what happened on Israel's northern border.
So on Israel's northern border, we avoided not by any action of our own, but by an indecisiveness of our enemy, an even more horrible tragedy. The original plan that when Hamas attacked us on October 7th was for simultaneously the Houthis to fire rockets from Yemen, Hezbollah to fire rockets and cross the border in the north, and for the Muslim population of Judea and Samaria to have a massive uprising against the Jewish communities of Judea and Samaria, which means Israel would have been caught completely by surprise on 3 fronts, or 4 fronts, depending how you count the Houthis, all at the same time. For whatever reason, that multi-pronged attack, thank God, didn't actually occur. It was only Hamas attacking from Gaza, and Hezbollah just started launching rockets. They didn't attempt any cross-border raids. They didn't even fire rockets right away. If you look carefully, they started fire rockets only on the 8th and the 9th. On the 7th itself, they fired 1 or 2 rockets, and they only started increasing it daily after that. They realized that Israel's busy in the south, so we're going to try and exact a price very slowly without actually putting any of ourselves at risk. And since then, Hezbollah has accomplished even more than it could have possibly dreamed of in a war. The entire north of Israel is empty of civilians. The entire economy of the northern Israel communities is completely destroyed. Communities up north from Metula to Malgilio to Shlomi are for the most part destroyed. The confidence of the civilians in the north that the government and the army can protect them in the future has been destroyed. And they haven't sent any soldiers across the border to accomplish all this. We've done it to ourselves on their behalf. They've fired, I have no idea how many thousands of rockets at this point. They've fired drones, killed 2 of my friends when we served up north over this past Pesach. And they get more and more accurate. And they decide, we like to think it's that we have great missile defense, that we're able to knock them out of the sky. But it's clear that when they want to exact a price on us, their missiles hit their targets. And we can keep telling us that our missile defense works really, really well most of the time. But when they want to, they know how to overwhelm it and exact a price from us.
Unfortunately, that seems to be the situation we're in now, whereas last week, following the attack on Majd el-Shams, which is a Druze village in the southern Golan that murdered 12 Druze children, Israel finally responded and actually attacked a Hezbollah enclave in Beirut itself, killing the number 2 person in Hezbollah, and who we've been told was most responsible for Hezbollah's rocket attacks on Israel. Since then, interestingly, the amount of rockets Hezbollah has fired has actually gone down somewhat. The question, though, is, like you said, Hezbollah always wants to exact a price. So first we had the assassination of Hezbollah's number 2 in Beirut. Soon after that, we had the explosion in Tehran that killed Ismail Haniyeh, one of the senior people in Hamas, and that happened in Tehran, which is a major blow to Iranian prestige and security. So Iran and Hezbollah took a 1-2 punch from Israel, and now both of them say they want revenge. They're going to try and get us back. And as you've said, Ari, if Hezbollah wants to attack and hit their target, they will. And we've seen, going back to the night of April 14th, Iran has a massive arsenal of ballistic missiles and drones. So now the question is, what options do Israel have? What are we looking at happening possibly in the coming days or in the coming week?
So I think moving forward, we have the same options of what we can do as Israel as we've always had. And they're all bad. In case you're looking forward to some glimmer of optimism and hope here, all the options on the table for Israel are bad. And I'm not the biggest fan of Henry Kissinger, but he summed it up perfectly in one sentence when he said the conventional army loses if it does not win, the guerrilla army wins if it does not lose. In the end of the day, Hezbollah is not Hamas. It's not cut off in Gaza where we can surround it and detach it from the world and slowly suffocate it. Hezbollah is in Lebanon. We're never going to control all of Lebanon and all of Syria and all of Iraq and all of Iran. And in the end of the day, Hezbollah, we can't choke them out. We can't cut them off. They're going to be constantly have a land bridge of supplies coming directly from Iran, both of manpower and material. And we may be able to push them further away for some amount of time, but they'll just make their rockets bigger and stronger. And eventually, we have no interest in holding onto territory that isn't ours. So eventually, we'll get back to a position similar to where we were before October 7th, where there's an enemy in our north. We're not willing to invade a foreign country, and it'll grow until it gets to the point where we can't accept the size it is anymore. And hopefully then we'll preemptively strike it. But at the moment, the options on the table for Israel are to continue what we're doing, which is play defense, which is we keep our citizens out of northern Israel. We created a security barrier on our north, in our territory. We continue, we shoot down the rockets that we feel like shooting down. We let the ones that we don't think are going to cause any significant damage through. And we play this game indefinitely.
But if we keep doing that, we acknowledge that the entire northern community has been abandoned. The entire Upper Galilee has been abandoned. Like you said, Shlomi, Kiryat Shmona, we might as well say those towns and villages no longer exist.
Exactly, which is what the government has decided to do up till now, without saying that out loud. The next option we can do is we can do basically the same thing, but we can up the ante a little bit. We can change the balance and the calculations that we use of what targets we're going to hit in Lebanon. We can accept more collateral damage. We can take higher risks of attacking targets that are in more civilian or more built-up populations. We can attack more of the leadership based in Beirut. And we can exact a heavier and heavier price from Hezbollah itself for every missile or rocket that they shoot. It's a little bit more of the same. We're upping the ante a little bit. Will it work? Will it not work? I don't know. I don't think at this point that killing the leadership of any terrorist organization will really make a significant difference.
That's kind of what happened last week, but the result was twofold. The first is Hezbollah actually stopped firing a large amount of rockets. The other side was we're now waiting for some type of major response.
Well, they stopped firing rockets. It's been a week. What happens next week and the week after? When they get bored or when that person gets replaced. In the end of the day, Hezbollah is a well-organized army. It's the same with any army in the world. If you take out an officer or a commander, there's always a deputy that can fill in for them. And you go further down the totem pole and further down the ladder, there's just more and more people that they can be replaced. Not only that, the top leadership of Hezbollah can be replaced by their Iranian counterparts at any time. So they may not be the local commander or the local guy in charge, but there's still someone that has decision-making power that can come in and replace them. Then there's a third option, which is I call it 2006 style, the Second Lebanon War, which is an extremely large air campaign with very limited ground invasions along the border, taking key strategic sites along the way that allows us more freedom of activity throughout southern Lebanon, which has the added benefit of now we've exacted a territorial price, not just on Hezbollah, but on Lebanon as a country. Do I think that the Lebanese army has the power or ability to actually combat Hezbollah itself? I don't think so. I think the Lebanese army doesn't really exist in any meaningful way. But by taking a strategic geographical place, we prevent them from having that geographical strategic benefit over us. And the question comes down to how long will the Israeli public accept an Israeli presence in southern Lebanon?
This would be going back to Israel and southern Lebanon from 83 to 2000. It's a replay of Israel's invasion of southern Lebanon and maintaining a security zone.
Well, it's a replay of that, but to a limited extent. Were we going to go all the way to Beirut? Probably not. Will we take only the strategic areas along the northern border? In order for us to do anything, that's where we have to start from. The question is how far north do we go, and how long do we hold on to it, and what's the end game involved? If it's very short-lived and for very short term, it'll have a very limited effect. Which leads us to what the fourth option, which is, in my opinion, I think what has to happen, but also in my opinion is the least likely to happen, which is to do the first Lebanon war all over again, but on steroids. To properly invade Lebanon as a country, we have to recognize and stop lying to ourselves that Hezbollah and Lebanon are separate entities. Hezbollah controls Lebanon. They're part of the political system of Lebanon. They are the power, the central power in Lebanon. In the end of the day, everything else are puppets for Hezbollah in Lebanon, and we have to go to war with Lebanon, flat out, conquer at least all the way to Beirut, put in a military government in southern Lebanon, and start rebuilding the power structures locally, giving the Christian communities that are minorities there the power back to control their communities. And we can just decide that there's going to be nothing allowed to exist in southern Lebanon. We can say up to the south, up to the Litani River, or further north or further south, wherever the army deems necessary. Empty it of all human existence that's not the army, and say we're not willing to accept people here. History has shown that nothing good comes of it. I'm sorry, but that's the price you have to pay for attacking us.
So I'm going to stay with the fourth option because this is the riskiest option, but unfortunately it's the option that appears to have the most likelihood of success for Israel, but it also has the most likelihood of failure. So let's talk about how practically and militarily Israel would achieve this. One of the things I think we're noticing both positively after Gaza, but we've constantly had this problem in Lebanon, is the terrain in Lebanon is completely different. It's mountainous, it's hilly, there's limited maneuverability for a very large army, especially with the way the Israeli army works with large mechanized units, tanks, armored vehicles. It's a completely different ballgame fighting in southern Lebanon.
Right. So Gaza is beautifully flat. It's the one nice thing about fighting in Gaza, if there's such thing as a nice thing. It's flat, it's sand, it's soft, it's not so hard on your knees, and there's room to move. Even in once you're outside of a built-up area, there's room to move around. Whereas in Lebanon, like you said, it's mountains, it's valleys, it's hard to maneuver. But we forget that the Israeli army is extraordinarily flexible. It's just a matter of deciding, as an army, we have to decide that that's what we want to do and commit the forces necessary from the beginning. The biggest failure of the Second Lebanon War was the doctrine that the army used to attack was very limited, and it would only commit forces in small groups. It was called a chativa, a brigade attack, but it was only one battalion, one company, not even a full battalion. It was one company at a time, instead of having the whole battalion or brigade attack at once from different directions. They were very limited in scope, and very small numbers of units were committed to any one attack. There are places in southern Lebanon where we can, where we can maneuver with larger forces, and there are areas where we need to use smaller, but a larger number of smaller forces at the same time. We are capable and flexible of doing that, but the decision needs to be made to commit the forces to do it.
The 7th of October changed a lot of the mindsets within the Israeli military. At least I'd like to believe it, that for the first time, the mid-level in the military realized we can't just have this half in, half out doctrine of, no, now we actually need to go in with as much firepower as we can and start to break things down in order to achieve victory. For myself, and I think for many other people, until the land invasion in Gaza, Israel hadn't been willing to have a mass invasion, a mass infantry, a mass troop deployment into enemy territory since 1982.
Correct.
This changed in October. So it's possible that the Israeli military, after learning incredible lessons in Gaza, can now do this.
I think one of the things that was proven by our invasion of Gaza, and I say this from firsthand knowledge and experience. My job in reserve duty, one of them is I coordinate the fire support for my battalion. So that means the artillery, the Air Force, the Navy, when we were working along the coast. Through the radio on my back, me and the fire control officer, we coordinate all of our fire support. And we've done it in training in limited ways where we've practiced it. But it was the first time that I can remember since I first started my army service back in 2004, that it was put into action massively, where we would advance through different parts of Gaza. There would be a wall of artillery fire that would move in front of us, or there would be a planned attack or operation on a specific section of one neighborhood, that we had pre-planned targets that the Air Force would hit with a specific amount of time before we got there. When we were working along the coast, we had the Navy doing overwatch for us. It was actually very, very cool. It was the first time I personally have ever worked in coordination with the Navy. But to be able to talk to a ship that's 2-3 kilometers out to sea, who's watching me and he's protecting my flank, and he's able to shoot anything that moves on my flank, that prevented that, the intimate coordination was something that we got very, very good at. And the Army showed that it's very good at doing. In Lebanon, that would be critical. Not just the ability for us to coordinate with our outside fire support as we advance, but that our outside fire support would be able to advance with us. So that means the artillery teams would have to advance still farther behind us. They'd have to advance to be able to keep up with us as infantry as we moved quickly, which is something, again, we've done in training. We've practiced to a limited extent in Gaza, that we can put into action, I believe, if the army were to allow, if the higher echelons would allow us to do it to an extended, to a greater effect in southern Lebanon this time.
Right. A couple of years ago, when I was in training, it was explained to me the best army works like rock, paper, scissors on the ground. What does that mean? That everyone thinks a tank is an incredible beast of the military, but a tank is vulnerable to anti-tank missiles, as we unfortunately have seen all over the time. But anti-tank missiles need to be fired by specific anti-tank crews, and they're vulnerable to infantry units. So the rock, paper, scissors is tank, anti-tank, and infantry all need to be able to coordinate to protect and dominate the opposing side.
Right, which is something that we've shown and that we've done very well in Gaza, where the tanks and infantry worked intimately one with the other, where there is an anti-tank threat, not like Hezbollah has, but where the tank provides a base of support for the infantry provides a curtain of protection, and the ability to advance faster and more smoothly, one with the other. In Lebanon, that becomes more complicated because, again, the terrain doesn't allow you to spread out. Terrain is such that, but again, an anti-tank missile could only be fired from so far away. And at the same time, the tank can shoot much further. So it's able to provide protection for its infantry forces from much further away from the infantry. We're not talking 20, 30, 40 years ago in the first Lebanon War, where infantries and tanks had to be very close together. We can protect them from very far away from them, and they can protect us from very far away from us.
And as you explained, the Israeli Defense Force from operating in Gaza has gotten very good at coordinating with the Air Force, with artillery, and with components on the ground, tanks and infantry, etc. So it sounds like you're more positive about whatever major options come up from Lebanon.
I'm positive that no matter what option comes up, in the short term, we'll be victorious, we'll be successful in any battle we enter. And I do think that we'll pay a price in blood. It'll be limited. I don't think it will be as bad as the talking heads make it sound like it will be. The question is going to be long term. It's also like in Gaza. In every battle with Hamas, the Israeli army, Tzahal, comes out on top. We don't lose any battle. The question is who's going to win the war? So even in southern Lebanon, we will win every battle we enter, hands down. We will decimate our enemies on the battlefield. The question is going to be, in the long term, if the political powers can translate those military victories into political long-term gains.
Now I do need to address the elephant in the room. While Israel is contemplating an invasion of Lebanon, or what we're going to do in Lebanon, Iran. As we stand now, people are worried about some type of Iranian attack on Israel. What does that mean? What do you think that means? And is Israel prepared for it?
I think that an attack from Iran against Israel can take twofold. There's two there's two possibilities. I think one would be similar to what we saw in April on that fateful Saturday night when they launched 300 plus minus missiles, drones, and all that fun stuff at us, which I think showed two things. One, most of them fell very short, either falling on their own in the deserts of Jordan, Iran, and Iraq. Overwhelmingly, the rest of them were shot down by the plethora of allies and help that we had along the way, which I do think we can still rely on. At least the American administration has definitely confirmed that they would be there again. And I think that there's really not much to fear from that. Do I think that they can send 600 or 700 or even 900? Maybe. I don't think that. I think that distance gives us the ability to prepare for it. I think the other option that they have is the same way that we successfully assassinated leadership of our enemies on their territory. I don't think they would succeed in assassinating leadership in Israel on Israeli territory, but I do think that they can just decide to attack Jews or Israelis wherever they may be around the world. And we might see Iran lashing out at the Jewish community of New York, the Jewish community of London, the Jewish community of somewhere else in Australia. I don't know.
I think it's important to remember in 1993, the Israeli embassy and Jewish community center in Argentina was attacked. And that was Hezbollah doing it following an Israeli attack on Hezbollah positions in Beirut.
So I think that all of a sudden now the chessboard just got a much bigger of the potential targets for an Iranian attack. And that is obviously much more difficult to protect against, because now you're not any target that you protect really well, they'll just move on to the next target. And you're not going to be able to protect every Jewish target globally in the same way. So they're just going to find the weakest link in the chain and attack there. The only way I think to counter that is one, extraordinarily great intelligence, which I hope we have. I think sometimes it's amazing. October 7th proved that it's sometimes not so amazing. But I think that the other thing we could do is just be extraordinarily strong in our own resolve here. One thing that our enemies do respect is strength and power. They only attack when they view us as weak. As long as we are viewed as strong, they don't dare raise their head. Perfect example, 1967, right after the Six-Day War, we were at the peak of our exterior strength. The world viewed us not just as a lion, but as the lion in the Middle East. There was nothing that can get in our way. And it was only not until 1973, when there was already the beginnings of infighting about what to do with Judea and Samaria, what to do with Gaza. There's already talk then of it. And there was infighting within the higher echelons of the political world that we were attacked from outside. Again, now, we weren't attacked at the peak of Netanyahu's premiership. We were attacked when there was significant infighting in Israel over internal reforms and disagreements, where even here our media was saying we're on the brink of a civil war. Do I think we really were? No. But that is what the vibe, I would say, was in Israel. And there were even reservists threatening not to continue volunteering for reserve duty. It was only at that point that our enemies attacked, when we were weak. I think that after any battle or any war we have in the north, as long as we project strength to our enemies, that will prevent them from attacking.
All right. Well, that's the good way to end on our positive note. Israel needs to project strength. And I think more than that, we also need to believe that we're strong. Thanks very much for joining us in our new podcast, Shaun and Ari Discuss Israel. Thank you to Tamil Dotal and Ala Mashmod for hosting us. That's all for this week. If you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, and share. We hope to be back next week with another episode.